Hello and welcome to Remember the Film, the podcast where your angel of death awaits. I went right up to the microphone on that one. I kissed the mic on that one. Hi, I'm Josh Bradley, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Jeff Grizz Ulrich.
Hello.
And we are without our other co-host Hugo today because Hugo is on assignment. And so instead we are joined by a friend of the podcast, frequent listener, and brother of one of the co-hosts, Jason Bradley. Hello, Jason.
You'll probably be able to tell by the voice immediately which brother, because we sound the same. Hello, everyone.
Also, anyone watching on YouTube, Jason and I are sitting next to each other. Hey, how you doing?
Back in your frame.
Just reach my hand in Jason's frame, and we're gonna be doing that a lot, or maybe not.
I hope not.
Today, I really need to just get to it. Today, we're talking about Batman: Mask of the Phantasm, the animated DC movie from 1993. And before we talk about that, we need to talk about Batman the Animated Series, which was a television program produced by Warner Bros. Animation and aired on Fox Kids from September 5th, 1992 to September 15th, 1995. And the reason we have to talk about Batman the Animated Series is because that's basically...
Younger listeners, that was a television network, yes. Something that doesn't exist anymore.
Fox Kids.
You can learn about it in a museum.
Yeah, Fox Kids. Got to talk about that because that's basically what birthed Batman Mask of the Phantasm. It's basically hey, this show's good and people like it, let's make a movie out of it kind of thing.
We can make money out of this.
Yeah, that's also something that happened in the 90s. Fun. Batman the Animated Series, it was created by Bruce Timm, Paul Dini, and Mitch Bryan. And those names are important because Bruce Timm was one of the co-directors of Mask of the Phantasm, and Paul Dini co-wrote the screenplay of Mask of the Phantasm. And this show was the first entry in the continuity of the shared DC animated universe, which I believe Jason calls the Timmverse. Is that right? From Bruce Timm?
Yes. You can find that kind of vernacular online among the most devoted Batman nerds. The Timmverse, Bruce Timm being a creative force involved with creating, directing, godfathering, starting with Batman the Animated Series and moving through the New Adventures of Superman, the Justice League Unlimited, and many direct-to-DVD or video type of animated, movies and stuff.
And even into like Teen Titans too, right? A little bit.
Yeah, he's connected to that. I don't know specifically if he had maybe like any credits with it, but all of that DC animation type of stuff from the late '90s, early 2000s, the Timmverse.
Grizz, watch much of the Timmverse when you were a kid or after?
Yeah, no, I've watched tons of DC animated movies and things. In fact, I believe Bruce Timm is back once again for the newest movie that's coming out like next week, Batman: The Long Halloween, and he's back as the executive producer on that one. So he's still doing it.
A fabled comic story, Batman: The Long Halloween,
great one,
and an influence in some of the major motion pictures too.
So Bruce Timm and company designed the animated series by closely emulating the Tim Burton films, especially their, quote, otherworldly timelessness. If you watch like the Burton, Batman 89 and Batman Returns, they kind of like take place not quite in the present day, but also like not quite in the past. He incorporates like period features such as black and white title cards, police blimps, 40s influenced fashion, and the car stylings, and like a vintage color scheme. That's all in the animated series, taken from the Burton movies. And Jason, I wanted to ask you about the animation style in the show and in the movie via black backgrounds. Yeah,
one major innovation of this animated series was that they made a fairly simple change, but it led to such a specific aesthetic kind of concept that then they would reuse again, and it was that they animated on black paper instead of white.
Back when they were drawing by hand.
Yes,
Kids.
There is a long list of animators credited in this movie and in the early days of the animated series before they were using computers for that. And that black background, seemingly a simple change, but it really gave the show and then this movie the dark feeling everywhere. And that darkness could sometimes be ominous, fear, thrills, or it could be the emotional or the psychological representation for whichever character. Typically Bruce and Batman. That darkness was very important. Sometimes it's almost like it's playing a role in the scene.
Yeah, there's a lot of that psychological darkness in this one.
Yes.
Absolutely.
In the movie that we're talking about.
Great for children.
But the TV show was a critical darling. It won 4 Emmys in its 3-year run, including for Outstanding Animated Program. And it's since been thought of as one of the best animated series of all time, really. IGN, the website, listed it as the best Batman adaptation outside of the comics, which is very high praise. And they also listed it as the best comic book television show of all time. But I'm curious as to when they made that ranking, because like this used to be like one of the only comic book television shows, I feel like, and now there's like a lot of them, like Loki, currently on the air.
That was they did that pretty recently, like within the last 5 years. They did a ranking.
Cool. Like I said, it's consistently ranked among the best animated shows of all time, and it's interesting to like look at this like in the scope of kind of Batman canon, because a lot of people credit the show with like kind of taking villains from the past that were kind of like campy or like not as interesting and like making them a lot more interesting. Particularly, people cite Mr. Freeze and Clayface for like adding like tragic pathos to the characters' backstories to, again, make them a lot more interesting. And also, Harley Quinn did not exist in the Harley Quinn's a creation of the Batman animated series, and then she was incorporated into the comics, and now obviously incorporated in the DC universe, and she's a major part. So that's maybe like the biggest legacy of the show.
It's certainly one of the biggest legacies of the show. You know, earlier we had talked about the stylistic sharing or transition from the Tim Burton movies to this show, and I always think of it as like that. You have Tim Burton style, and then it gets borrowed / adapted and changed for the show. And I think then that style grew out into, obviously with the characters, we see the influence of how those characters are changed with their stories and their creation for Harley Quinn and their you said pathos, right? I also think that into the movies, into subsequent TV shows, and into comics, this show has its roots under all of that. Even video games, the Arkham video game series absolutely takes influences from this show. Not just the voices. Paul Dini, one of the major writers from this show, creator of Harley Quinn, he wrote for those video game storylines too. And yeah, the voices definitely. You get Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill, who many would argue are the best Batman and the best Joker.
And I probably will argue that.
We can get into that later, but I just think that the animated series has these roots that are running under so many different parts of Batman media. I think you see some of their changes and adaptations and choices in the comics, in the other media on TV, certainly in the movies, and in the video games, like in the Arkham video game series.
Yeah, I have a section in the outline talking about how, like, Mask of the Phantasm in particular kind of, like, reflects the Burton movies, and also, like, the Nolan movies are kind of borrowing from it, and the Schumacher movies are kind of borrowing from it, too, so it does have wide expanse. Grizz, what do you got?
I was just going to say that in the animated series, the episodes Heart of Ice and the Feet of Clay Part 1 and Part 2 are some of my favorite episodes from the show, but it's also, they've basically redone elements from those episodes in later versions that have, like we said, made Clayface into a villain that people might actually care about a little bit. Or in the case of Mr. Freeze, that story from Heart of Ice has been redone in new versions of all these Batman animated shows every time since then because it was so good. So very widespread impact on Batman lore just from this animated series.
I was going to mention that later, but yeah, so Bruce Timm, we can move into the Mask of the Phantasm in a second. So the only thing I wanted to ask was, Grizz, you watched the animated series, right?
Yeah, of course.
So it was like, me and Jason watched it every day as kids, and it probably influenced like our tastes and personalities quite a bit. It was probably one of the most important pieces of media in our young lives at the time.
Foundational text.
Definitely.
Absolutely a foundational text, particularly for Jason, who loves Batman more than I do.
Well, it certainly influenced our playtime and leisure as children, as I was constantly putting on a cape or some version of a cape onto my back.
Correct. But because you just mentioned those episodes, Grizz, I'll mention. So Bruce Timm co-directed Mask of the Phantasm, and he directed some of the best episodes from the animated series, including Heart of Ice, like you just mentioned, but also Laughing Fish and The Man Who Killed Batman. Those 3 episodes largely considered some of the best of the series. And Paul Dini, who also co-created the animated series, co-wrote the screenplay for Mask of the Phantasm, and he wrote some of the best episodes, like, again, Laughing Fish and Man Who Killed Batman, but also Joker's Favor, which introduced Harley Quinn for the first time, and Almost Got Him, which I think might be the consensus best episode of the animated series. Almost Got Him.
It's certainly up there just because it features such a wide variety of villains in an unfamiliar setting. They're playing cards and talking shop.
Yes, and all swapping stories. And then there's a big twist with
Right.
One of the villains.
Spoiler alert for
my
Killer Croc's big
surprise
story.
From the animated series stuff is that it was only 3 seasons.
It was only 3 seasons, but like it aired like every day.
Yeah,
so
for like a decade. So to me, this show ran for a decade.
Well, even when on first run, it was airing every day. So like even though it was only 2 seasons, there's like 80 something episodes.
It's not just that Timverse I mentioned. This Batman that we see in the animated series and in Mask of the Phantasm is the same Batman in the same universe who later meets and encounters Superman in the new Adventures of Superman, and then is a founding member of the Justice League. So, yeah, 10 years or more that you're with this Batman.
You're welcome, Zack Snyder. So let's move to our film to remember, which is Batman Mask of the Phantasm. So this was released on Christmas Day, 1993, so right in the middle of the run of the animated series. Budget of $6 million. It made $5.6 million at the box office, so it did not make its budget back at the box office. As mentioned, it was directed by Bruce Timm and Eric Radomski, and written by Paul Dini, Alan Burnett, Martin Pascoe, and Michael Reeves. And Warner Brothers greenlit the movie originally as a straight-to-video release, but then after season 1 of the animated series did so well and was so popular, they decided to release this movie theatrically. But that kind of screwed over the filmmakers a little bit, because most like theatrical animated releases take about 2 years to make, and they only had 8 months to make this one because Warner Brothers kind of changed their mind quickly about whether to do it direct to video or theatrically. So they had to really rush to get this out, and like I said, 8 months to get it out, which is crazy. And the filmmakers have kind of pointed to that as the reason for the poor box office performance, because first of all, they didn't have any time to market it because they decided really late in the game to even release it theatrically. Yeah. And also, so no one knew about it is what they're saying. Plus, at least on Christmas Day, this is exactly I wonder what this is competing with. In fact, I could probably look that up. But I mean,
that's pretty common for a lot of animated movies do get released on Christmas, but, usually they are Christmas-themed animated movies.
A little more holly and jolly.
I'm looking at the Christmas weekend, 1993. Anyone want to take a guess what the number 1 movie was? It was a John Grisham adaptation.
Oh my gosh! So was it the Rainmaker?
Brief.
The Pelican Brief.
Number two, family film starring Robin Williams,
Patch Adams,
Mrs. Doubtfire.
Mrs. Doubtfire.
The only new release of the weekend is Tombstone. Number 4 was Sister Act 2: Back in the Habit, and number 5, Beethoven Second.
I'm just saying, this was a good week
2
in
sequels.
Number 6 was Grumpy Old Men. Number 7 was Wayne's World 2.
3 sequels.
So yeah, Mask of the Phantasm opened at number 11 with a 1.2 million opening weekend. So not great. But,
Shout out to, did you say Sister Act 2?
I did.
One of my wife's
Back
favorite
in the
movies.
Habit.
Yeah, not Sister Act is one of my sister-in-law's favorite movies. Sister Act 2 is one of my
she would tell you the music's better than in the first one.
Which we all know is the most important aspect. And last thing I'll say in the boilerplate section for Mask of the Phantasm is apparently Citizen Kane served as the inspiration for the flashbacks, where they wanted to tell a story about loss and the passage of time, because Batman Mask of the Phantasm is a non-linear story where it's kind of jumping back and forth in the timeline. So shall we get right into the plot? Any other comments on the boilerplate? Okay, let's do it. So, Warner Brothers, like I said, they kind of decided when they were already making the movie to release it theatrically, so they actually upped the budget in the middle of production. So they bumped them up to $6 million. It originally was not $6 million. And so you see that money in the opening frames of the movie, because the title sequence is this computer animated, basically flying through Gotham City with these tall buildings. And I think it's the only computer animation in the movie, right, Jason?
That's right. I think that opening sequence is a representation of not just the money, but the compressed timeline, because they were like, here's all this money, do something with it, but do something with it in 10 minutes. All right, well, we're going to get a cool animated sequence, and then the rest of the film will be as is
like
the
we
show.
Always do it.
Yeah, because we don't have time to do anything else.
But also, the music in this opening credit sequence is frickin' bomb. Shout out to Shirley Walker, who is the composer for the animated series. Well, actually, Danny Elfman is kind of credited as composer in the early episodes. Well, in the early episodes of the animated series, not on this movie, but in the early episodes of the animated series, it's credited as Danny Elfman because, the opening credits of the animated series is music directly from Batman 1989.
Right.
But then, they brought in, Jason, you can speak this more, they brought in Shirley Walker, and, she kind of, took over and, kind of took Elfman's score and kind of like played with it and gave it a new spin, right?
Exactly. The details of, perhaps who owns what with the opening sequence in the animated series in terms of the music, I don't know specifically. I always understood it as Danny Elfman,
it's credited to Elfman,
playing with Warner Brothers, was saying like, yeah, you can use this. And then Shirley Walker took it and used it as the thematic kind of bones of the rest of the music in the show. And so I think both of them get a lot of credit for a great, iconic Batman and Gotham and the stakes of this world. Very adult ideas in a kid's show for that music. And you get it. The music is a character in this movie. I mean, every
absolutely.
Punctuation with either the chorus or the orchestra matters.
Well, Shirley Walker's music in the opening is like the traditional Batman animated series theme, which is... how's it go? It's like...
No,
that's the Elfman theme.
Oh, right.
We went the da 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 da.
Yeah, that's the animated series.
But in the opening, it's like a chorus singing it, not just instruments. And the second time we hear chorus singing it is one of the key moments in the movie when he puts the mask on for the first time. But we'll get to that.
Yes.
And Jason, I also want to ask you about in the opening credits, Batman. They credited Bob Kane in the opening credits.
Correct. Yes. So since 1939, when Batman made his first appearance in Detective Comics number 27. Bob Kane was credited as the character creator for Batman. But he worked at that time with an illustrator and, I presume, fellow idea generator named Bill Finger. Bill Finger, for decades, was created with lots of iconic characters in Batman's universe, including the Joker, Robin, but never getting a character credit for Batman until, both of these men are long dead, but in 2013 or 2014, whenever Zack Snyder's Batman versus Superman comes out, 2016, thank you, that is the first time Bill Finger and Bob Kane's estates are sharing credit. And to Bob Kane's credit, he lived longer than Bill Finger. For a long time, he had said, Bill Finger deserves to get credit for this character with me. We did this together in the beginning. And now both men, in your modern presentations of Batman in media, Bob Kane and Bill Finger get credit for creating the character and world of Batman.
Is Bill Finger related to Raleigh Fingers?
I'm assuming, yeah, because if you have the same last name as someone within one letter, you're related. That's the rules, guys. We don't make them on this podcast. We just relay them to you.
So after the really cool opening credits, I think they're really cool at least.
Yeah, they're great.
We get this opening set piece of Batman interrupting this gangsters meeting, and maybe
interrupting is putting it mildly. He crashes through the window.
Well, right. Before we get to that, though, I'm wondering if I'm like reading into this too much, but do I see like a Citizen Kane homage in like how the camera kind of comes into the rooftop of this building and like it approaches the glass? Like, do you remember in Citizen Kane, camera famously goes through the glass? It doesn't quite like go through the glass, but I thought because like they reference Citizen Kane in terms of like inspiring the flashbacks, I wonder if they're also borrowing from it for this like opening shot as they boom in on the gangsters through the glass, through the roof.
With that extra bit of context of knowing that it was inspiration for other things in the movie already, I can see that. But the fact that it didn't go through the window, I'm like, is this a coincidence?
Yes. But I don't know. We've talked about Citizen Kane on this podcast before. Go seek out that episode. It's a good one. But regardless, so these gangsters are like basically talking about like a counterfeit money scheme, which doesn't really matter to the plot at all. But the important thing is there's a guy named Chucky Saul among these gangsters. And again, as Jason just said, Batman interrupts, using a euphemism, and just takes out all these guys. Chucky Saul runs away, and Batman pursues him. But before he does, he throws a table on top of a guy, so a guy's like crushed by a table, and then as he walks out the door, he like stomps on the table. So which as a kid I remember very distinctly. A lot of this movie, me and Jason watched this movie an awful lot as kids when we were like way too young to understand it, and like most of this movie went over my head, like way over my head. But like I remember little details like that, and like being like. So I remember the table stomp very distinctly.
Yeah, as a kid, you're like, yay, go Batman!
Stomp on him, Batman!
Punch those bad guys! And you're like, is he in love? Is this the past? Who cares? He's cool!
So the gangster Chucky Saul gets away. He goes to like the parking garage of this building, and he encounters this mysterious figure in robes and masks.
Chucky Saul!
Yes. Chucky Saul, your angel of death awaits.
The smoke and the cloak.
Yeah, it's a smoky, cloaky figure with a axe for a hand kind of thing, and this guy is trying, this Phantasm, as we learn to call him, is trying to kill Chucky Saul.
I have to say something right now on that note.
Yeah.
As you say, as we learn to call him. Never called the Phantasm.
Never once called the Phantasm, no.
In the entire movie.
I know he's called the Phantasm because that's the name on the box that the VHS came in.
And the name on the action figure.
I thought that was so weird. Like, so wait, who's the Phantasm? Is it this guy? I mean, I would assume so, but Batman wears a mask.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Batman's the Phantasm, which is also a
maybe
mistake.
It's the phantasm of the life that Bruce and Andrea never got to have.
Actually, Frankenstein was the name of the doctor, not the monster. Jason, you want to mention?
Sorry, it's Phantasm's monster that ends up in the parking structure chasing Chucky Saul. Right. My apologies to the audience.
You wanted to mention the blood in this scene.
Yes, so as the Phantasm engages with Chucky Saul, one of the moves that is employed is to crash through his windshield as Chucky Saul attempts his escape. And then he rolls off the car. But in that moment, there's a brief shot of Chucky Saul driving away, determined to run down this foe. And he's got a tiny little bit of blood on his chin, probably from the glass that flew through the vehicle.
Or he cut himself shaving that morning.
Or he cut himself shaving.
Yeah.
Maybe he was shaving in the car. A lot of people do that when they're in a rushed commute. It's understandable. You know, you gotta hustle. Anyway, this blood is notable because in the animated series, Fox, the network, strictly
Fox Kids.
Fox Kids. Famed television network Fox Kids would not allow the use of any blood. So this blood that shows up in this movie, minor as it may be, and it recurs a little bit in other more dramatic and violent scenes, is kind of novel to see that on this show.
You pointed it out in the Chucky Saul scene. It comes up again when
the police pursue Batman.
Which we'll talk about later, and then again in the climax. There's actually quite a bit of blood in the climax.
Yep.
I mean, quite a bit's a relative term, but...
Is that something that you noticed as a kid?
Yes. Yes, when we were kids, I remember that this had blood. Now, I didn't know about the TV network not allowing it in the show, but I knew the difference between the show and the movie. Like, ooh, this has blood. This has people dying clearly, not just implied.
Yes.
That's dramatic. So, you're not getting that on your daily afternoon cartoon after school.
I didn't notice any of that as a kid. I was like, oh, this is just like the animated series. Never even occurred to me that there wasn't blood in the animated series.
Unfazed by blood.
Or that people...
Grizz.
Or that when people died, like they always died off screen in the animated series. Like it was implied that they died. But in this one...
I mean, it's implied here.
I mean, some of it, but then some of it is like, you know... Like, I mean,
we'll talk about Buzz's death in a second. Buzz's death is pretty intense. Yeah.
I was going to say Buzz and then and Salvatore.
Yes. Okay. So Chucky Saul drives off the parking structure and ends up dying, and Batman kind of like gets there at a really inopportune time, such that like onlookers kind of see him and think that he may have caused Chucky Saul's death. So then,
I know that. I'm sorry. I know that that's like, you know, it's Batman, and you know, so people are going to see him and identify him like, oh, Batman fights crime, and you know, so like maybe he's responsible. But like, if he was just standing like on a street corner, that would be like, it was probably that guy. It's like coincidental. There's no evidence.
This movie has homages to other noir style films. We've talked about Citizen Kane. Is it possible, or is it a reach, that the dead man in the car with the horn blaring is not an homage to your favorite film from this podcast, Chinatown? Forget it, Batman.
I was going to bring that up later. Because there's a scene where Andrea and Bruce are kissing, and her elbow like touches the car horn and it stops them from kissing.
Wrong car horn.
Not every loud car horn is an homage to Chinatown, but maybe it is, on the other hand.
This is a car horn with a dead guy.
What this movie presupposes is, maybe it is an homage.
Josh is just driving around town. Anytime someone honks at him, he's like, oh, they love Chinatown.
Evelyn Mulray's dead. Spoilers for Chinatown,
But then somebody points to Josh and it's like, it was that guy.
Anyway, so because Batman is somewhat kind of softly somehow implicated in Chucky Saul's death, we cut to this loudmouth,
eager to take advantage of that soft implication.
This loudmouth councilman named Arthur Reeves, who's denouncing Batman's vigilantism, and then this councilman Arthur Reeves takes a call from this mysterious woman who's on a plane flying into Gotham, who implies she has some kind of romantic history with Bruce Wayne, but we don't get any more than that at the time.
Her face obscured here at the opening. Perhaps we'll watch for that again.
Yes, watch for her face obscured. And then during a party, Bruce again runs into Arthur Reeves, and like Arthur Reeves makes mention of this former fling that Bruce had, that we later learned to be the woman that he just talked to on the phone on the plane. And then so Bruce goes to he gets away from the party, looks at a portrait of his parents, and in doing so flashes back to the time that he met Andrea Beaumont, the aforementioned woman, and he met her at a cemetery when she was mourning her mother and he was mourning his parents, and they kind of like, I don't know, bonded over that, and then had a little meet cute at the cemetery.
Our parents are dead. We should hang out.
Aww, that's so sweet.
Well, so the show and this movie, there's a clear dividing line between Bruce Wayne and Batman. It's the mask and the suit and the actions. But the voice actor of Bruce and Batman in the show and in the movie, Kevin Conroy, has given multiple interviews over the years talking about how he chose to portray this character, along with the casting and voice director, Andrea Romano. He always believed there were three characters he was playing. There's Bruce Wayne, the playboy, the public face, a mask, a fairly empty vessel, spoiled, rich, privileged guy. That's the city of Gotham knows him as that, not doing much.
The one we see
at the party. And that's who he's playing in the party when he gets a drink thrown in his face and he's talking to three women.
Four eventually.
And then there's also Batman, of course, who puts on the mask and becomes the creature and fights crime. Right, yeah. And Kevin Conroy very skillfully affected his voice in these portrayals. Yeah. But then there's Bruce Wayne, the actual Bruce Wayne, the face that very few people see. Alfred, some of his allies. And that's Bruce Wayne, the kid whose parents were murdered in front of him, who can never let that go, who made the vow. In the comic books, the vow is made when he is 7 in that alley when they're dying. And in this, it doesn't explicitly say when the vow happens, but obviously it's a major part of his life.
The vow is just kind of implied with the vow is. Yeah.
But that's the third character. That's real Bruce Wayne that you see slumped against the door, his face, kind of screwed up and like, oh, God, as he looks up to his parents' portrait.
So in this scene at the cemetery, he actually does reference the vow. Again, a vow he made to his parents. He says that to Andrea, that he made a vow to them. And she asks if he's been keeping the vow, and he kind of slyly smiles and says, so far. And yes. And I guess it's later implied that the vow is like he's going to fight crime and be Batman. But then like when he says so far, it's because, he met a woman and might want to give that up. And so then after that, still within the flashback, we see him do his first little bit of vigilantism, where he is not yet in the Batman costume, but instead just in like dressed in all black and wearing like a ski mask, and like interrupts a robbery and stuff, and has to like chase down a guy in a tractor trailer. And Grizz, let me know if you see this. I saw a bit of a Raiders of the Lost Ark homage in this sequence, because the way he like climbs up the front of the truck, the way that Indiana Jones does.
I mean, that's definitely possible. Obviously, Raiders had come out fairly recently in the grand scheme of things, and I mean,
10 years earlier,
yeah, in the grand scheme,
yeah.
Long enough for it to like have infiltrated culture enough to where this sort of homage, would be done. So I can totally see that.
But this little bit of vigilantism, like, technically works. He, like, gets his guys. He rescues the security guard they tied up. The police get the people who are doing the robbery. But also, like, it was a little hairy at times. It wasn't something was missing. Yes, something was missing. But, Jason, you want to talk about his utility belt in this early video?
I did, because I couldn't help myself and keep a mental inventory of, Bruce's tools. I wouldn't call this Batman yet.
Well, Batman famous for his toys, as Jack Nicholson says in Batman 89.
Absolutely. And you do see a utility belt as a part of this costume, but certainly a rope as we see him swing in. Could it be the famous grapple gun? It's possible. We see him throw several shurikens, though they are not the famous batarangs yet. And then we see him pull, a little ballpoint hammer out just to smash the window of that truck when he's on top of it. I just think the hammer is so funny. Like, let me just pull out a tiny hammer, crack.
Not much finesse.
I also think it's really funny because he hits with the hammer and there's like a bright flash of light, like the hammer created sparks or something.
Yeah, it's a sparky hammer. Don't you have one in
Maybe
your
it's one of those hammer flashlights?
Yeah. Just in case I need to blind someone driving a stolen truck.
Have you ever had to hammer in the dark? Yeah, I got a hammer in the dark, sparky hammer.
I also wondered in this moment which bat suit, quote unquote, is a rudimentary version, is less practical. Punching and doing karate and gymnastics in a heavy leather jacket, or wearing a cowl that does not allow you to move your neck, a la Michael Keaton in 1989. it's a tough call. Which one would be tougher to fight crime in?
I think the one where you can't move your neck is probably the most inconvenient.
Yeah, but if he ends up in water in this jacket, he's probably going to drown under the weight of it.
As Lucius Fox says, you want to be able to turn your head. Got it. Might make backing out of the driveway a little easier. Yeah, that's Christian Bale replies. Okay, anyway, back in the present day, after this flashback where he meets Andrea Beaumont and does this for a little bit of vigilantism. Actually, interesting, real quick, the flashback is an interesting juxtaposition where he meets Andrea as Bruce Wayne, mentions the vow, and then the next scene we see is him kind of like doing the first steps of the vow, which
trying
is
to fulfill the vow.
The bit of vigilantism, exactly. So we cut back to the present day, and we see another gangster named Buzz Bronski go to the cemetery to visit Chucky Saul's grave, the gangster who died in the opening scene, and he also encounters the Phantasm at the cemetery and dies a pretty brutal death as the Phantasm somehow, I don't know how strong this person is, pushes a giant angel statue onto him and crushes him, which is a rough way to go.
Your angel of death, indeed.
Your angel of death awaits.
He literally gets his angel of death.
Yeah, that's a scary sequence, man. And again, Batman is mistakenly blamed. So then another gangster named Sal Valestra, who's voiced by
Abe Vigoda.
Abe Vigoda, R.I.P., recently deceased. Tessio in the Godfather movies. Tell Mikey it was just business. It wasn't personal. Yeah, just business. So this gangster Sal Valestra, he was associated with Chucky and Buzz, and he sees in the paper that they've been killed, presumably by Batman, or at least they think by Batman. So like Saul panics and thinks that Batman is like out to get that whole gang. And so while investigating Buzz's murder, Batman goes to the cemetery to like search for clues and stuff. And while he's there, he encounters Andrea Beaumont at the cemetery in a scene that mirrors Bruce Wayne meeting Andrea at the cemetery. It's the exact same setup of how they encounter each other. So that's doing two things. Number one, it's setting up this contrast between Bruce and Batman. And number two, it kind of clues Andrea into Batman's identity if she didn't already know. Jason, do you think Andrea knew Batman's identity before this moment?
I think it's possible, given how much she had access to Bruce's foundational time period when he's transitioning from the vow as abstract to the vow as the mission, as he sometimes calls it in the comics. But I don't know for sure. Maybe that solidifies it when she's like, let's see, I knew Bruce Wayne. I knew he wanted to do this for his parents. And then after something happens with our personal life, since we're not to spoilers, Batman shows up in Gotham around that time. Could she have put that together? Maybe. But I think in this moment, we're seeing the service to the plot and the trying to really bring that duality between Bruce and Batman clearer for the audience get sacrificed at the altar of Batman being really sloppy. Why would Batman be loitering around the grave site of the Waynes? That's a little bit on the nose. If anybody happened to walk by, they'd be like, "Oh, is that Bruce Wayne?"
Yeah.
Oh, it's same height. I just realized that.
What do you got, Chris?
So I was just thinking that it's possible that her past experiences with Bruce enabled her to jump to that conclusion more easily, but I thought it was pretty implied with the way she says,
I agree.
Bruce?
Like,
that was the first time that it actually occurred to her, but it probably made sense because, like, oh, that's right, all this stuff about our past really would feed into a guy being like this.
Or she's saying it just because she hasn't seen him in a decade or so. It's really up to you, it seems like.
Well, regardless, Andrea then goes to have dinner with the loudmouth Congressman Arthur Reeves, and Batman watches from a distance and apparently can read lips and therefore gleans the conversation. And so while Batman watches Andrea and Arthur have dinner, we again flash back as Batman thinks about his past relationship with Andrea, and we see them as a couple go to this in the past in the flashback go to this World of the Future Expo in Gotham City, which I think is a fun but a little on the nose metaphor for Bruce and Andrea as a couple exploring their bright future and the world of possibilities that lay ahead of them and the hopefulness that implies. And ultimately, it's a future they never see. And this World Fair Expo is eventually kind of
corrupted,
profaned, corrupted, soiled in ways that we'll talk about later, which is again a metaphor for the disintegration of the future that Andrea and Bruce will never have. And actually, there's a nice moment where Andrea asks Bruce, "Do you think we'll really see any of this in our lifetime?" And instead of answering, Bruce is distracted by a car off in the distance that will serve as inspiration for the Batmobile. So very meaningfully, she asks Andrea asks him, will this be our future? And he does not answer because instead distracted by the possibilities of Batman, which I thought was a good detail.
Is that the only time we see the Batmobile in the movie?
He does hop in it to leave the cave after a
Okay.
particularly pithy exchange with
I just remember
Alfred.
like not seeing a lot of the Batmobile, and that, kind of surprised me a little bit because, it's so prominently featured in every other version of Batman.
And Jason, you pointed out that like Andrea talks about the future a lot. Andrea's father talks about the future a lot, but Bruce doesn't really talk about the future.
Not particularly, and I think that's a thematic choice that you're supposed to try to pick up. That because Bruce can't focus on the future. He's torn between in his present, which for us is his past, between a future with Andrea and the vow. So he's not thinking about, well, the future's so bright for me. Yeah. Up until he met her, his future was going to be sacrificed in the name of a vow to his parents and to the city.
But like you just said, he does start to feel torn because he's falling in love with Andrea. And so he agrees to meet her father, which is like a step in the relationship that he didn't think he would ever take with anybody, but he does. And they meet her father, and like he while meeting his father, they're interrupted by Sal Valestra, who's the gangster we saw in the present day, and
young Abe Vigoda.
Young Abe Vigoda. So it's implied that Andrea Beaumont's father, Carl, is that his name?
Carl
Beaumont is Carl. Good to see you. He is involved in these unsavory characters.
But of course, Andrea is completely clueless to that.
Clueless to this. Also,
she describes mobster Sal Valestra as not a people person.
Understatement of the century. Also, another detail is Arthur Reeves, the councilman we see in the present day, is the little, peon.
Young Turk.
Of like the accountant.
Sounds like he's an accountant, but does Carl Beaumont call him a lawyer?
I don't know.
Business. Who knows?
Yeah, I don't know business.
But there's someone else at this meeting that... Is it this meeting or later?
Sal Valestra's driver is seen, but not heard.
Okay, so that's what I'm... Okay, so... Well, obviously we're going to talk more about that later, but
yes.
I always feel conflicted with this because there's things I want to know about characters and things I don't want to know about characters, and this is on that gray line.
As a frequent listener and enjoyer of this podcast, I have been here and there curious as to why you guys save spoilers so specifically, and it's funny to participate now to dance around.
Well, in case you haven't seen the movie, you can listen to like the front half of the episode and then pause it and listen later.
All right, podcast audience, you've had 29 years, 28 and a half. You better hustle up because we're going to spoil it in the next...
And like 37 minutes of this episode, yeah. So I hope you've enjoyed these first 37 minutes. We're going to spoil it soon, but not yet. So after they meet Andrea's father, Bruce and Andrea, again still in the flashback, encounter a mugging/robbery, and Bruce tries to intervene, and he's frustrated by his limited ability to do so, and Andrea is like, trying to like coddle him and treat his injuries, but he's just like kind of brushed her off because again he's just like mad that he couldn't have done more. And then later he is with Alfred, like trying to figure out like what he can do to like better his vigilantism. I mean, very notably, he's like trying to draw prototypes of what will become the Batsuit, and he's very conflicted. Jason mentioned the conflict between Bruce and Batman. He's very conflicted in this moment because he wants a future with Andrea, but he also wants to keep doing the vigilantism. And again, it's an interesting juxtaposition between, the World's Fair Expo and meeting the father. So that's the Bruce part of the future. And then that's immediately undercut by encountering the robbery and vigilantism. So it's again juxtaposing those two and the conflict they're in. And then this scene ends with, again, Batman literally saying, "I just don't know," and banging his fist against the wall because he doesn't know whether to keep developing this Batman personality or Andrea's on the phone. He doesn't want to answer her. Jason, what do you got?
I think it's moments like this where the line between Bruce, and Batman is blurry is when Kevin Conroy is at his best because he employs his voice so effectively. There are obviously different voices for Batman and Bruce, but sometimes those voices start to meet in the middle when Bruce is frustrated and he's starting to get that growl. Yes. I just think Kevin Conroy is the master of keeping those two characters separate and then being able to mash them together.
He's such a great voice actor that
he really, really is.
It's kind of like, I'm sure this has been an issue for casting him in everything else ever, because it's like his voice is so iconically Batman for so many people that it's got to be really tough to put him in other roles because everyone's going to hear it and be like, "Hey, that's Batman."
When I read a comic book, I hear Kevin Conroy's
100%.
And notably, the last thing I mentioned about this scene is that Batman kind of voices the whole conflict of the movie and also of his character, which is, quote, "It's got to be one or the other. I can't have it both ways. I can't put myself on the line as long as there's someone waiting for me to come home," which is obviously a reference to Andrea and struggle that Batman has a lot moving forward, even beyond Andrea Beaumont. I think that's it for the non-spoiler section. But before we move on to the spoiler section, I want to talk about briefly, because we got to get going, briefly about how, like I mentioned earlier, how this movie kind of reflects the Burton movies and the future Batman stuff reflects back from this movie. And so, like, some things I noticed, you guys can add to this list too, but Batman being blamed for others' crimes and associated public outcry, that comes up in The Dark Knight, and that's in this. The origins of Batman, including him doing some vigilantism before he gets his costume, that happens in Batman Begins. If you remember, he like uses a stapler and like pretends it's a gun in Batman Begins. That's before
in that scene, he has a ski.
Yeah, he has a ski mask on, just like this movie. The Phantasm's use of tear gas as a fear tactic, I thought that was like not
Scarecrow.
tear gas, but like, you know, yeah, Scarecrow in Batman Begins, exactly.
It's at least a misdirect. We don't know what the chemical composition is. Batman doesn't even know.
Sure.
As he analyzes it.
Bruce debating quitting being Batman because of a woman. That happens in Batman Forever. That happens in The Dark Knight. That kind of happens a lot.
Happens a
forward.
lot.
Yes. Yeah. And also, finally, there's a lot of imagery kind of literalizing the dichotomy between Batman and Bruce Wayne, which I absolutely love. I told Jason one of my favorite like single images in the entire Nolan movies is after someone important dies. In the middle of that movie, it's Batman or Christian Bale sitting in his bat suit with his mask off. And so it's, again, literalizing the dichotomy of like Batman and Bruce Wayne as one person. And you see a lot of that in this movie, too. There are several sequences where he is in his bat suit, but not in his mask. And that's like a very interesting visual image to me. Anything you guys got about like, you know, images you see from the Burton movies? Also, like the final shot of this movie is like almost exactly the final shot of Batman 89, but that's, you know, later on, I guess. Anything for you guys?
Nothing immediately jumps to mind. You kind of hit on the stuff that I was aware of.
I did good, yeah.
I just think it's noteworthy that so many of these themes that we're seeing here and we see done in other major motion pictures depicting Batman, you get a lot of this from the comics as well. These ideas about Batman struggling with the duality, you're going to see that all over the place. I mean, this character's been in comic books for 70 plus years now.
So let's move into the spoiler section. But also, like, I haven't really said this in the podcast, but for the record, let me go on record and say, like, we're 28 minutes into the movie that's 7 to 8 minutes long. We're just basically through Act 1. So, like, to call the rest of the movie spoilers is, I don't know, whatever. But
just go watch it.
Like,
why would you listen to
I always
this
think it, like, the first act is not spoilers because that's setup. Yes. Everything after that is potentially spoilers. So,
but I think most movie trailers nowadays show a significant part of the second act.
If we're basing how we make stuff off how they make trailers, trailers show everything.
I've touched a nerve, clearly. Anyway.
Stop touching his nerves.
I'm sorry. I'm just...
Hands to yourself on the podcast, please.
Touch. So Bruce is frustrated by his inability to stop the robbery mugging, and he wants to continue with Andrea, but he also doesn't. And so he goes to, still in the flashback, he goes to his parents' grave in this very emotional scene that basically explains the whole ethos of Batman. Yeah. And it's Bruce on his knees pleading with his parents via their headstone, begging them to release him of his vow so that he can be with Andrea. And man, what a great scene. Jason, you want to talk about the animation on Bruce's face, right?
I very much want to talk about how Bruce looks and what he says. Yes. This is about 60 seconds. It's in a children's cartoon, but I know I've made reference to how old Batman, how well established the character is. This is one of, if not the best examples of the pain that comes with being Batman. A lot is sometimes made in the characterization. Does he enjoy this? The violence, the weaponry, the force that Batman employs? Is he sadistic? And some people interpret the character that way. But I think this moment is an example of how being Batman is a curse. And that's because you're seeing Bruce Wayne here, real Bruce Wayne, begging his parents in the rain. His face is screwed up in agony. I mean, this is a cartoon where they've added lines that you don't typically see on Bruce Wayne's eyes here.
Yeah.
So that they can show his pain. And he says, I didn't count on being happy.
devastating.
Yeah, that's such a devastating line. It's just like the other line. It has to be different now.
Yeah,
right.
All that is.
I need it to be
different now.
Oh,
that is
so
good.
Yeah.
That is good writing.
And honestly, Kevin Conroy also even as a kid, again, this went over my head. I didn't really understand what was happening here, but I just remembered as like a 6-year-old, the way that he says please, like the way he says please, like really stuck with me as a kid. Like it's so good.
I think for a kid, this part of the movie is not necessarily for a kid, but for a kid, you're supposed to understand Batman's having a hard time because you still think of him as Batman even in the past here. But as an adult, when you watch this with new eyes and new understanding, it's just, ooh, wow.
Great scene. And also, Andrea is meaningfully behind him at the gravesite, and so like this scene ends with them embracing, and like basically he asks his parents, send me a sign this is okay, and she says maybe they already have,
and that's a great line. Maybe they sent me.
That's a great line too. Yes.
I don't know, and every time she says that, when I've seen this now as an adult, I think that's a tragic line, because of course they didn't. You'll never have that.
So then we cut back to the present day, and I'm kind of trying to move this quickly. Basically, we see a scene that shows that Arthur Reeves, the councilman, has some kind of history with the gangsters because he has a scene with Sal Valestra. So basically, again, Arthur has a history with the gangsters. And then as Batman investigates Chucky and Buzz's death, he finds Sal Valestra's name and basically connects the fact that they were all connected through like dummy corporations. Jason, during this scene, there's some Easter eggs you want to mention.
You get a really great deep cut here.
He's at his back computer and he's typing in like Buzz Brosky. Chucky
he's looking for businesses
Yeah.
that the mobs would be using
Dummy
as fronts
corporations,
to connect them all, and he gets O'Neill Financing and Adams Tool and Die, and these are references to classic Batman writers from the 70s of the comic books. So you're getting Denny O'Neill shouted out and Neil Adams, who are both often given credit for kind of swinging Batman's tone in the stories from camp and silliness and even color in the 50s and 60s, what's typically called the Silver Age of comics, into the 70s where it gets much more dark, realistic, and grim again. You're getting mysteries, you're getting, I wouldn't say violence per se, but you're getting higher stakes in the stories of Batman in those comics.
They're the authors that basically set up the possibility for a Tim Burton Batman.
Exactly. A Tim Burton Batman would never have made sense in 1989 without those comic book stories preceding it. And certainly you'd throw Frank Miller in there as well.
So, nice shouts out to those guys. And if you caught that shout out, congratulations on knowing a lot of stuff about Batman.
You have too much time on your hands, and you and I, since we both noticed that, need to focus on our families or jobs.
That's what Easter eggs are for the people really paying attention. So after Batman connects Sal to Chucky and Buzz, he goes to investigate. I don't know where he goes, but somehow he finds that Andrea Beaumont's father was also involved in these guys. He's going to back to Chucky's place.
I presume it's either someone's office or her apartment that she's.
He goes to some office and finds a picture with.
Finds the
Could it be Chucky Saul's office that he was in?
It might have been Chucky Saul's office.
So maybe he's at the Shady Lady Casino offices.
Sure. But he sees a picture with Chucky, Buzz, Sal, and Carl Beaumont. And the driver that we don't know yet, and he's not really important yet, but he will come up later.
And we see the magic of Batman's utility belt as he pulls a full, I don't know, 14 by 12 photo, frame and all, and just whip, tucks it right into his cape and into the bat belt, which can hold anything. It's like Hermione's
the room of requirements.
It changes the laws of physics.
It's a bag of holding for my fellow D&D nerds.
There you go.
Or if you watched all that, it's like Saggy Baggy Barry's pants.
Right.
That's a deep cut. There you go.
He pulled Abe Lincoln out of it.
So then seeing the picture of Carl Beaumont, he flashes back yet again to the moment that Bruce proposed to Andrea. And it's like outside Wayne Manor when he proposes. And again, every flashback has a really great juxtaposition between Bruce and Batman. And this scene's no different because right after he proposes and they're embracing and she says yes, their embrace and their engagement bliss is interrupted by a swarm of bats that fly out of this crevice outside of Wayne Manor and swirl around them, which again... kind of on the nose, but just a really, really great image of Bruce being happy, then suddenly bats interrupt his happiness.
The imagery is on the nose, but I do want to give credit again here to Shirley Walker because this is one of those cool moments where her score swells in, the ominous chorus comes back in, so it goes from sweet string orchestral piece as they fall into a kiss, and then the chorus is like, nope, this is a dark story.
Yeah. So Andrea has to unexpectedly call off the engagement. Again, I'm moving through this kind of quickly, but she calls off the engagement, and Bruce is devastated. He gets a note from her. She's going to do it in person. And then as soon as she calls off the engagement unexpectedly, it immediately cuts to Bruce and Alfred in the Batcave. Or maybe it's not even Bruce in the Batcave, but regardless, it's him putting on the costume for the first time. And Jason, just talk about it more from here.
Well, this is one of the moments that I remember from being a kid.
Yes, and this also has Shirley Walker's chorus score from the
it's
opening.
Absolutely doing work in this scene.
Yes.
The music. He doesn't go get the mask. He doesn't have it in front of him. He simply holds out his hand.
And he's in profile. He's in shadow.
Right.
We don't
you
actually
can't
see anything.
him.
Yeah.
He's completely obscured.
And Alfred hands him the mask.
And realize some of the context here. Alfred is Bruce's surrogate father. He raised him since his parents were shot. So from age 7 to approximately sometime in his mid-20s here.
Yeah, he's known Bruce longer than Bruce's parents knew Bruce.
Exactly. Grizz, that is why they pay you those big podcasting dollars. Anyway, so he holds out his hand, and Alfred dutifully hands him the mask. He holds it for a second. You see him inside profile. As he looks at it, probably deciding something along the lines of, this is it, now I become a bat. And he pulls it on and turns. And Alfred, who's known him his whole life, gasps in shock, and he says, my God. And the score swells, Batman's eyes in close-up narrow, as they very classically did throughout the animated series. And he walks into the shadow of the cave, and the memory fades. It's just, even as a child, I thought with the music and the mask, you see the profile of the mask.
It's Alfred's reaction that makes this scene for me, because...
Me too.
This goes back to something from earlier in the movie that we didn't mention, but after his first escapade, with the ski mask and everything, when he gets back, he tells Alfred, they weren't afraid of me. They need to fear me. And then this gets paralleled here. Alfred gives him the mask, he puts it on, and the first reaction is fear. And so I think that's awesome, especially since if this can generate fear in a man who knows Bruce as close, as well as Alfred does, imagine what this is going to do to criminals.
Also, like, Alfred, famously refined and unflappable, always, very proper. And, like, normally... If you watch the animated series, I feel like normally if Alfred's going to react to this, he would say something like, my word, or something like that. But the fact that he, like, kind of drops his pretense for a second and says, my God, like, that really affected me as a kid. Sure. The fact that he said, my God, instead of, like, something else.
He addresses Bruce as master and sir constantly. He is a formally trained butler.
Yes.
His background typically is as actor and soldier or medic, which sort of explains how he can help be Batman's ally in the crime fighting. And so a guy who's seen some stuff and knows Bruce Wayne, but this is the first time anybody's ever seen Batman.
Yeah, and it's the most powerful moment for me in this entire movie is when he finally dons the mask. Love it.
So back in the present day, Sal Valestra goes to the Joker for help because, again, he thinks the Batman is taking out all their crew. And Joker is notably staying. His hideout is in the ruins of the World of Tomorrow Expo that Bruce and Andrea went to in the flashback.
His Casa Nostra.
His Casa Nostra, which we'll mention that again later. And then Batman goes to Andrea to kind of shake her down about where her dad is, because, again, he just found the connection between her dad and these gangsters.
She very intentionally kisses Arthur Reeves passionately when she knows someone is in her room, and she knows who it is.
Yes, so, but, when asking about her father, she kind of stonewalls him, also reveals that she knows his identity, which he doesn't really react to at all. But also, once he leaves... she breaks down crying, which kind of implies that there's something more going on here about Andrea, her father.
I wonder what
Bruce.
would be a good way for her to deal with these sad and angry emotions.
Yeah, I wonder if there's an outlet that she has.
Maybe in the next scene? Probably not.
Okay.
Probably not.
In the very next scene, we go to Sal Valestra's house, where the Phantasm, Sal Valestra, your angel of death awaits. But it turns out Sal is already dead, and he is set up there as bait by the Joker to catch Batman, but turns out Batman is not the one killing these gangsters, it's the Phantasm. So a Joker bomb goes off. So Joker now knows that it's not Batman killing these people. A bomb goes off in Sal's place, the Phantasm escapes, and then Batman shows up, and there's a extended fight scene between the Phantasm and Batman, where he says this madness ends now, and the Phantasm says, this isn't your fight, etc.
Stay away. The Phantasm outruns a plane.
Yeah, Batman's chasing the Phantasm in a plane, and the Phantasm apparently runs a 1 second 40 time because he can outrun a plane.
That's just under the speed of sound. Come on.
And then the Phantasm gets away with their fancy smoke thing, and the cops go through this extended chase to try to get Batman because,
Great
again,
scene.
everyone thinks Batman is the one killing these people. So because of the councilman and public outcry, the police are after Batman, and lethal force is authorized. It's a pretty intense chase scene that involves quite a bit of blood.
This scene definitely influenced by a Batman comic series called Batman Year One, a work of Frank Miller that explores Batman's early days in Gotham. At the same time where he would have been considered a criminal or considered some sort of shadowy figure, unknown intentions, and the police pursued him a lot early in his career. This is meant to be, that. And it's well done.
And he notably has to take off his mask and cave at some point to kind of deke the police to go a different direction. And so he's running, again, as I mentioned earlier, the image of Bruce in his bat suit, but not with his mask, the dichotomy of Bruce and Batman. And he's notably rescued by Andrea Beaumont while in this state, which I think is very meaningful. And then so he's reunited with Andrea. Batman and Bruce both reunited with Andrea. And we get this Rashomon scene where it flashes back to a scene that we kind of already saw from a different perspective, where Andrea goes to her father after she and Bruce get engaged. And now we see it from Andrea's perspective instead of Bruce's perspective. And we see that Saul, Chucky, and Buzz are there shaking down her father when she arrives, and they're demanding money from him. I guess he was like their accountant or something, it's implied. And they're saying, you have 24 hours to get the money. Abe Vigoda / Sal Valestra very darkly says, in 24 hours we'll have my money, or I'll have your heart in my hand. Which really scared 6-year-old me.
And then right after he says that, he winks at that man's daughter.
Yes,
hey,
very
sweetie,
nice.
What's up, girl?
Yeah, hey, how you doing? So Andrea and Carl go on the run. And so again, Andrea is recounting this to Bruce. She's recounting the story to Bruce. So she says, we went on the run for several years, went to Europe, blah, blah, blah. And she implies that, she kind of softly implies that her father is the Phantasm, which makes sense because, as Jason pointed out, I don't know this, but Stacy Keach voices Carl Beaumont, and he's also the voice of the Phantasm. So, it makes sense.
Great misdirect.
That's a really good misdirect, because that's not true. He's not the Phantasm, as we learned.
Well, in this scene, I wanted to point out a line that Carl Beaumont says after he tells the gangsters we'll have the money tomorrow, but then he immediately turns to telling his daughter we've got to pack, we've got to escape. He grabs her by the shoulders after he's admitted his wrongdoing. And she's angry, her life is falling apart. He says, I'm going to protect you, I'm going to make it right. And he uses these words, whatever it takes. Certainly that is very much in the same vein as the motivation of Bruce, the love of her life. And later, Batman himself says that line as he grapples with the Joker in the climax. So I just thought that the use of those words, her father and Bruce, Batman, these men in her life that she really cares about, have that same attitude, whatever it takes.
So then, after Andrea leaves Bruce, he is looking at the photo of Carl Beaumont and the gangsters, and suddenly realizes something. He grabs a red-colored pencil and draws a face on the driver of the gangsters, and realizes, holy crap, that's the Joker. And Mark Hamill's laugh pipes in, and holy crap, that laugh is so jarring and so good, so effective.
Right.
What do you think of the drawing? Is that cheesy? Is that a little cheesy?
Bit. I mean,
I think that Mark Hamill's laugh,
the laugh makes up for it for me. I think the drawing is
it
wait
takes
a minute.
what would otherwise be what? Come on, world's greatest detective to this is a scary moment, and it helps that then they cut right to the Joker's encounter with Arthur Reeves.
Yes. Okay. So the very next scene is the Joker pays a visit to Arthur Reeves, and he kind of alluding to a history that we don't know about that Arthur Reeves has with these gangsters. And once Joker finds out that Arthur is involved with Andrea Beaumont, he injects Arthur with this toxin that makes him laugh maniacally and uncontrollably, which, as a kid, really freaked me out. So we see Arthur in the hospital.
It's in shadow.
Yeah, and we see Arthur in the hospital, unable to control his laughter. What do you got, Grizz?
So I'd alluded to that. I wanted to talk about this earlier, and I'll just touch on it real quick. One of the things that people, and myself included, really love about the Joker for a lot of people is that you don't know his actual origin story. And that no one actually knows who he is. This movie, while I love this movie, it is very clear there are people who know who the Joker actually is, and I don't love that. I even if it was just Joker was their driver, and they're like, yeah, he's weird, but we can count on him to get the job done or something. I don't know.
He notably never has a line of dialogue in the flashbacks before he's the Joker, so I agree with what you're saying, but also I can see a world where they just kind of brought this guy on, didn't know anything about him, and he just drives them and never says anything,
but they
also
clearly,
like
they know,
performs hits.
They
he
know
performs
him
a hit later in the movie. So
yeah, they know him well enough that he when he comes to him later, when Abe Vigoda comes to him later, he's coming to him as like, well, you're in on this too. We're all a part of this.
He calls him Joker here. He doesn't use whatever name he went by before that, which I think is also notable.
And that's a cool moment to me because it means that this guy is aware that the Joker doesn't want anybody to call him anything other than Joker at this point.
Maybe he went by Joker. Maybe they didn't even know his name, or he went by Joker before
it's possible.
Had the makeup.
It's just that's the one of the spots in the movie where I'm like, I don't know how I feel about that.
No, you're right.
It did make me think of something from another Batman movie. When The Dark Knight was in production, Christopher Nolan described their characterization of Heath Ledger's Joker as a force. They weren't going to explore the origin of the Joker because, like you point out, Grizz, people don't care about that. They just want to see the Joker as an agent of chaos, as he's portrayed in The Dark Knight, or as this violent and unpredictable foe for Batman, as he's portrayed in this cartoon. And I think, we're getting a sprinkling of a possible origin here. Like, they're implying really heavily, with Batman drawing the smile on that photo, that this guy was the Joker. But who is this guy to us in this movie? We don't know.
Sure.
He's there. He's silent. He's menacing in a couple flashbacks for Andrea Beaumont. And that's about it. So I still think they left it open enough to say, like, okay, this guy is connected. He's the Joker, but you don't know who he is. We're not even going to give you a name.
Right. So Arthur goes to the hospital with uncontrollable fits of laughter, which again freaked me out as a kid. And
very scary.
The fact that he
so
is laughing uncontrollably
painful.
and doesn't want to be laughing really freaked me out as a kid. Anyway, so Batman pays him a visit and questions him about Carl Beaumont, and he learns here that Arthur, as Carl Beaumont's protege, sold him out to the mob when he was, running for office.
Great Kevin Conroy Batman interrogation voice.
Great interrogation voice.
Well, and on that, real quick on that interrogation voice bit, it's a cool moment in that he's laughing uncontrollably, and the doctors have been unable to get him to stop doing this, and then all it takes is Batman to tell him, "I'm not joking," and then, oh, okay, no more laughter.
Yes. That's something Jason pointed out as we were watching it. So basically, Batman learns in this scene that Carl Beaumont is dead because he was sold out to the mob by Arthur Reeves. So he goes to Andrea's apartment. As Jason pointed out, he notably goes to Andrea's apartment as Batman, not as Bruce, which I think is important, as Jason pointed out. And while he's there, he gets a phone call from the Joker.
He also touches the locket.
He touches the locket,
which lets us know he's not all the way detached from her emotionally.
He gets a phone call from the Joker. The Joker sends a bomb to Andrea's apartment, which for Batman directly ties Andrea to all these goings on.
Yeah, that puts it all together.
Yeah, it puts it all together basically. So then we get the final set piece, which is Andrea. Well, we cut to Andrea, and before we can tell where she is or what she's doing, we cut from her face to a flashback, which is implied to be Andrea's flashback, where we the final flashback, which is Andrea going to her father's house, and the driver of the mob, who we know is the Joker before he was the Joker, he's walking out of the house as she's walking in, so she realizes, oh crap, you're here for bad reasons, so she runs inside, and we hear her scream, presumably because her father had his heart ripped out, or something of the like. We cut back to present day, and Andrea is at the Joker's hideout, about to, take care of the final piece of unfinished business, which is after she already killed
Complete
Chucky.
the Phantasm's revenge.
Complete the Phantasm's revenge, which is to kill Joker, who, physically killed her father. And the Joker, we have this final set piece where the Joker, knows it's her, so she rips her mask off, she fights him as Andrea, not as the Phantasm, and he's about to, get the best of her and, send her into a swirling turbine, but Batman rescues her. So then there's this confrontation between Batman and Andrea, where Andy says, Batman says to her, but Andy, what will vengeance solve? And he uses her name Andy, not Andrea, right, which I think is meaningful. And what does she say back to him?
She says,
what will vengeance solve?
If anyone knows the answer to that, it's you.
Yes.
And it's the second time she's called him out for his vow, his mission. The only one here who's controlled by his parents is you. She says that earlier when they meet after her date with Arthur Reeves, and then she says this line about vengeance here. Clearly, she is kind of pushing back against Bruce because he's saying, why are you letting this consume you? And she's like, look at you. She's holding up a mirror to Batman and Bruce at the same time. She's one of the few people who knows them both well enough to do that.
Yep. And she's, avenging her parents, just like he's avenging his, kind of, in a different way.
But she's using lethal force. Yeah. That's his issue.
And, as I kind of alluded earlier, it's very meaningful that Andrea and Batman/Bruce are reunited here in this setting, which is like the ruined, decrepit site of the location that once symbolized their bright, promising future, and now it's decrepit and, like you said, Jason, soiled by the Joker. So, again, like a good metaphor of the future they never had and how it's been ruined by, violence in their lives, basically, and vengeance, potentially. So then, again, this is just a big set piece where Andrea Andrea leaves because Batman says, well, vengeance solve, etc. Then there's a set piece between the Joker and Batman, where they fight among like these miniature buildings. Where Jason, you pointed out, they look like Kong and
It
Godzilla.
seems like they're supposed to be larger than life figures, like King Kong or Godzilla. I mean, the Joker even uses an Empire State looking tower to crack Batman across the head.
Apparently, the filmmakers like included this as like a bit of a joke in reference to the opening scene, which opens with a bunch of buildings of Gotham City. And now, like Joker and Batman are fighting among these same buildings, not the same buildings, but you know what I mean. And then at the end of the set piece, like you said, Jason, Batman says whatever it takes to the Joker, potentially like dooming them both to death. But then Andrea and the Joker, like they kind of get away, or maybe they don't. Like it's kind of like it's kind of a weird sequence where like she's holding him, and like smoke surrounds them, and like suddenly they're gone. So
yeah, and the whole place blows up.
Batman barely escapes. And then in the Batcave, Alfred confronts Bruce. Again, the dichotomy, it's Bruce in his bat suit with his mask off, so Alfred is both comforting Bruce and Batman kind of simultaneously. Again, that dichotomy, the imagery. And Bruce finds Andrea's necklace in the Batcave, indicating that she's still alive. But what did Alfred say to Bruce there?
Well, Alfred's trying to comfort Bruce, the mask off, but in the suit, so the line between Bruce and Batman's blurry again. And he talks about the abyss of vengeance and darkness, and he says, "You walk that line every night, and I thank heaven you've never fallen in. But vengeance consumed Andy years ago. She fell into that pit years ago." And I thought that the pit metaphor was interesting. There's
they're
some
in the Batcave.
They're
in the Batcave when he says
they're sitting on a cliffside in that moment. Alfred, ever the stalwart father and teacher for Batman. Yes. I like that they gave him that moment here.
And then our ending image is nearly exactly the ending image of Batman 1989, where it's Batman on the rooftop and then Bat Signal in the distance, with the score swung around him. But notably, Batman 89 ends with him and Kim Basinger. What's her name?
Oh,
Vicky Vale.
Vicky Vale. Yeah, Batman and Vicky Vale like together, and he's on the rooftop with the Bat Signal. In this one, he's not together with his.
I think he kisses her and says, "I gotta go to work."
I think he does say something like that.
In Batman 89.
Yeah. Okay. And that's it. Batman Mask of the Phantasm. What a great movie.
The mission continues.
Like, honestly, honestly.
Fantastic movie. And I just want to say, and I'm far from the only person who said this, this is an animated movie with a much more adult and mature and meaningful story than any other representation of Batman. This is how they all should be.
and like I said, me and Jason watched this all the time as kids, just because we were such fans of the animated series. This, back when you couldn't just press a button and play any episode of the animated series on demand. Like basically, we had this VHS, and that was our way to watch the animated series over and over again. Was just watch this movie over and over again, and it went entirely over my head, like entirely. But I just I liked watching Batman and Joker on my television screen. But like watching this again as an adult, like. This is really, really good. Like it's a great story. The visuals are awesome. The characters are interesting, and there's interesting psychological stuff about Batman's past and everything. Like this movie rules. Jason, what do you got?
Well, I know that in recent episodes of the podcast, when you guys discussed Paddington and Paddington 2, you all seem to agree and make the case that a movie for kids should not be talking down to kids. It shouldn't be a lowest common denominator type of thing for themes and intelligence. And I agree with you. I'm a school teacher. I work with kids. I agree with you that you got to set a high bar for kids to meet. And even though sitting down and watching a movie is a leisure activity, I'm not saying it has to be like a quiz, but invite kids to explore these kind of higher level themes in their videos and media or whatever. I don't think it's bad for them. And I think you get that with this. Obviously, this is not like Paddington, because Batman never puts on an adorable raincoat or eats marmalade. But, I think that high level in the attitude of what they're showing is there.
That's the themes is what's the important part here. For a movie, a kid's movie, the best kids' movies are the ones that you can come back to as an adult and realize that you were taught something from this movie that you didn't even internalize at that moment. But, years later, you're like, oh my God, I get it now. This movie teaches you about sacrifice. It teaches you about, duality of man. It teaches
choosing a path for yourself.
Yeah, and that your decisions will have impact not only on yourself but on those you love. And these are all great themes that as a kid you're just like, yay, Batman's fighting Joker. This is great.
It's so cool.
You're getting hit with these themes, and I'm a big animation fan, and that's one of the reasons is because it's just the best ones tell stories that are good for your entire life. And I think that's what I can say about this movie.
I've made reference to my Batman fandom throughout this podcast many times, so I apologize for beating people over the head with it. But since I was a kid, when I would see Batman in anything, I always took away the dedication. That whatever you decide to devote yourself to, so for Batman it's like vengeance, crime fighting, justice, swirl, it requires sacrifice, and it requires, pain and challenge, and you gotta stick with it. And, that was always my kid takeaway from Batman.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the cool cape, obviously.
Oh, also, there's several pictures of me and Jason, like, age 3, 4, or 5, whatever, and we have blankets tied around our necks for capes, and we're doing this. To listeners on the video, I'm holding my 2 index fingers above my head as if they are Batman here, so, yeah.
It will surprise no one
I demand that you tweet those photos out.
I don't know if they're not digitized, but I can try to find them.
That we were Batman and or Robin for Halloween more than once.
I was Robin for Halloween, 2 or 3 different years. You've been Batman for Halloween probably like half the Halloweens you've been alive.
Well,
Jason
in my adult life, I've been
Hood
Batman
cosplay.
for Halloween the last few
Jason
years
Todd.
in my hometown. Okay. For the kids.
So we all are big fans of this movie, clearly. I think it's a great movie. Hugo, who's on assignment, he was nice enough to leave us his take behind. So follow Hugo on letterboxd, Hugo Panay, or whatever. I don't remember his letterboxd
Hugo
handle, but this is what he wrote.
It's Hugo Big Punch 2020, I think, right? Because he's got those ham hands.
This is what he wrote on letterboxd. Quote, this 70-minute animated movie made with a relatively low budget as a spin-off of a cartoon is a deeper psychological examination of Bruce Wayne than any Batman movie. The score and art style are outstanding. The movie is structured perfectly, and the way it uses the Joker in his supporting role is so much fun.
Now, can you please reread that and imitate Hugo's lovely accent?
No, I will not.
You just lost a listener.
So we gotta rank this, and Hugo told us where he would rank it. Hugo said, okay, current, he said he would put it 15, so I'll read the top 15. Current top 15 from 1 to 15. Silence of the Lambs, Citizen Kane, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Paddington 2, Boogie Nights Network, Larry of Arabia, Chinatown, Bicycle Thieves, The Thing, Your Name, The Departed, Shaun of the Dead, and The Wind Rises, and at 15, Sound of Metal. Hugo is putting this above Sound of Metal, below The Wind Rises. Grizz, what do you think about that?
I do really love this movie, but I think I would have to put it below Sound of Metal, personally.
Okay. Well, once again, this is hard because if I come up from the bottom, I'll encounter a movie that I like better than this. But if I come from the top, it ends up in a different place. If I come from the top and move down, I think I would put it just below The Departed, so above Shaun of the Dead. But if I come from the bottom, it's not beating Jackie Brown, but I don't know. So to be nice to the movie, I'll say I put it at 13 below The Departed. But you guys have it at respectively 16 and 15, so I guess that means it goes to 15?
15,
is that right?
That's correct.
So it goes below The Wind Rises, above Sound of Metal, and Ensemble. Jason, how do you feel
I
about
spent a lot of time on my personal ranking, and so of the movies I have officially viewed for the podcast, this would be 1 out of 1.
All right, cool.
So you listen to us basically every week and haven't watched.
I have
any
not
of the movies
been able to
we're
catch up
about?
on every episode yet, but I do. I've listened to. I think I've probably listened to half the episodes.
That's pretty good.
All right.
B-, guys.
That's more episodes than most people have listened to.
I'm a professional grader. B-. Keep it up.
We're small and
room to grow. Have a growth mindset.
And even though we just ranked this, it kind of doesn't really matter because what are we doing next week, guys?
We're re-ranking next week.
Woo!
It's
we now
time.
have. we have 30 film to remembers on our list, and we are going to...
Attorneys General.
No, we discussed this in an episode that I guess you didn't listen to. We've made the official statement that the official plurality of film to remember is film to remembers.
Oh, was that on Bicycle Thief? Sorry.
Official podcast take. So we are going to... I'm going to re-rank the 30 movies based on what I think it should be. Grizz, you're going to do the same. Hugo's going to do the same. And then we're going to do a very sophisticated and proprietary algorithm to determine the podcast order based on the input from the three of us. And then we will reveal our new order of the film to remembers and next week's episode. And that's going to be, I guess, the bulk of the episode, because we're going to talk about like how we still feel. Yeah, how we feel about the movies. You know, some of these movies we watched 8 months ago, some of them we watched a week ago. So we're going to talk about like how they've held up in our minds, how they compare to the other stuff, and that kind of thing. I think it'll be really fun.
So no new film to remember.
No,
not
no
for this
new
next
film
week.
to remember. Yes.
Interesting.
So it'll be a clip show episode, basically. Or not really, because we'll actually be here giving our opinions, but like the equivalent of a clip show if this was like a series.
I intend to bring up like conversations I've had with other listeners of the podcast, things like that, about like what we had to say about those episodes, those movies.
Yeah, especially because like I even said this on Mike in the episodes, like some of these movies we're watching, like I'm watching the night before for the very first time, and like I'm the kind of person that I can't like develop an opinion. Like Mank, for example, I was like, I liked Mank a lot after first seeing it.
A little lukewarm on Mank.
But I've since watched that a few more times, and like I freaking love Mank now. So like Mank is going to climb a lot in my personal ranking. But like that's kind of the point of this, is like we're kind of reassessing like now that we have some distance, and you know also like we never really gave much thought to like the math of how we're going to rank things and taking into account all three of our opinions. So now we're going to actually do that math and take into account all of our opinions. So that'll be next week. Tune in for the famous re-ranking that we've teased for a few weeks now, I feel like.
It's finally going to pay off.
We've basically been teasing this since week 1 when Josh says, I hate this ranking system.
Whoa, that was a dead-on Josh impression. I didn't know you could do that.
Hey, shut up.
Maybe do that more in the podcast.
I can't do a Grizz impression, so this is uneven.
The representation of the fans on the podcast, I think you should heed my voice. Grizz, mock Josh more.
No.
Mock Josh more.
Stop it. And next week, we not only get the return of all of our film to remembers, but also the return of Hugo Panay. So, Grizz, where can we find you online?
You can find me on Twitter at GoodGameGrizz. I'm also on twitch.tv/GoodGameGrizz. And I'm also hosting the other podcast I host, Podcat Monsters, the Pokemon podcast. Tomorrow night, we have a special guest, Cam Hawkins, who has appeared on IGN and various other gaming outlets, and we're reviewing Pokemon 3, the movie, which is, a classic Pokemon movie. Right? So check us out on that.
So tune into that. The villain is Mew 3, right? That's a joke. Jason, where can we find you online?
Nowhere. I'm anonymous, and we'll just keep it that way.
He is a middle school teacher, therefore must remain anonymous and have a very small online footprint.
Read a book, play with your kids. There you
go. Or read your kids and play with a book. Your choice, out here.
Less useful, but fine. It's your choice.
You can find Hugo at Hugo_Panay on Twitter, and I think also Hugo_Panay on letterboxd, I think. He's probably on other podcasts too. I don't really know them offhand, so I don't know. Just Google Hugo and find him wherever he is.
Google Hugo and find him.
Yeah. That's a new game. Where in the world is Hugo Panay? You can find me on Twitter at Brosh Jadley, and you can find me on YouTube at Movies I Love So Can You. You can find the podcast on Twitter at RTF_pod. Do not go to at RTF_podcast because they are sworn enemies.
Or RTF no_pod. We have 2 enemies now.
Hey, should we follow the band Deep Blue Something?
No, stop it. We're getting sued or something. I don't know. And I think that's it. So tune in next week for the return of Hugo and the re-ranking, and we hope to see that.
Goodbye, everyone.